Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Men, there are about 152 million of them in the United States, and according to a Wall Street Journal article, they express anxiety differently. This is part one of a two-part piece the State of Us is doing. And so this one is the challenges men face today. And then we're going to talk about, in here pretty soon, the challenges that women face today. And we'll have a guest on for that one, a woman. And not just any woman either, but you'll just have to tune into that one. We're not going to give too much away, because it will be very different, from this episode, because the challenges faced are somewhat different for sure. So why do you care about what challenges men are facing and how anxiety might be part of those? Well, considering the fact that there are 152 million of them and that there's about a 50% chance that any of you listening out there are a man, I think that there's a pretty decent chance that you should care, because I can't imagine that anybody listening is in a situation where they never encounter men. So it's hopefully pretty straightforward, both of these episodes, why you would care about it. But we couldn't begin a conversation on anxiety, men, and the challenges they face without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
I'm feeling a little anxiety right now.
Yeah?
With that new opening. We don't tell who the boomer and who the millennial is.
But it's the mystery.
Oh, I see.
We don't know.
Okay.
We can't disclose that. They have to figure it out.
All right.
Now, if they go to the website, it might give it away.
Ooh, that could be.
They
That's
might
a good
figure it
point.
out.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, speaking of the website, Lance, thestateofus.org, right?
That's where it is.
We've got two articles today.
Okay.
So they're both from the Wall Street Journal, but if you want to check them out, we've got this great setup on the website, right?
Where you can link in and follow along and read and look in more detail, because we're just going to pick and choose different things that we want to discuss, but from these articles, which are the basis for today's show. But you can read the article in its entirety if you so choose.
So we're going to start in the first bit today breaking down some of the anxiety trouble that men face, and how it presents differently in them than in women. Then in the second part of the show, we're going to talk about balancing work and family, how that dynamic and the classic gender roles are changing and what that means for men. And then in the last bit of the show, we're going to talk about where we go from here, and also some of Lance and I's personal experience with the things that we're speaking about in the first two segments. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the article entitled, "In Men, Anxiety Can Often Look Different." Men are more likely, Lance, to use alcohol and drugs to cope with anxiety. So what looks like a drinking problem may actually be an underlying anxiety disorder. And anxiety in men often manifests as anger and irritability. And that's because anxious men may present as loose cannons, but they're actually worried, according to Kevin Chapman, a clinical psychologist in Louisville, Kentucky. Aggression tends to be more socially acceptable to many men than anxiety, he says. Studies have found that about 1 in 5 men will have an anxiety disorder during their lifetime. Okay, so that doesn't mean for their whole life.
Right.
But at some point in their life, they're going to be faced with something that's classified as an anxiety disorder.
Uh-huh.
And this is particularly worrying because research is finding a clear link between anxiety and suicide.
Right.
So it's not just I'm worried about things. It's this can lead to me feeling like there's no out.
Well, they point out even more so than depression. Before,
Right.
the studies have always linked depression as one of the main causes of suicide. And now they're saying it's anxiety is now, not that depression still isn't a major part. Let's not mislead people out there at all. But that anxiety plays a much larger role in it than people have thought in the past.
And I think one of the things that the article highlights here that's important is this difference in what men see as socially acceptable for them to display and to talk about,
Sure.
right? And it's not unusual to see a man who's angry, right?
Exactly.
Or
irritable.
Or irritable.
In my case.
Those aren't necessarily unusual things.
People call me the grumpy old man sometimes.
The grumpy old man.
There's your irritability.
Oh, did we just give away the millennial and the boomer
thing?
We
did.
Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Well, maybe you're a millennial,
it goes
but
with
you're,
the show.
You're 60 at heart.
Right.
I mean, you could still be a grumpy old man. You could be a 38-year-old.
Well, I figure they've already turned into the website and looked it up.
Gotcha. They already went to the state of
inquiring minds want to know. If they're like you, they're on their phone. They've already gone to the website and they found out.
Man, you're giving more away. Okay, so the one point that I think the article makes that's real important about this is that anxiety is a normal thing. Okay, now it can get to levels that aren't normal and are unmanageable. And that's where we get into the problems, right? But that's one of those things that I think we have to start with right away, because this is part of why men don't feel comfortable sharing it, because it's that whole, I must be weird for feeling this way.
Well, and again, it also talks about in the article, and this was, and it maybe it's, and this is again, but it's generational, but it was a sign of weakness. Sure. I remember growing up, you didn't talk about being anxious or depressed or whatever.
Or worrying about things.
If you were a male, because that would be a sign that you were
confident.
Weak. Right. You knew things were going to be okay. And if not, you would find a way to take care of everything and take care of everyone. And so you didn't have time to be weak and depressed and anxious. And so it was, I mean, that's kind of, this is the way that I grew up with all of that. And the article points that out, that to seek some kind of help in this fashion was a sign of weakness. And I remember in I think it was 1972 presidential race, one of the vice presidential candidates had to, was the one party had put out there that they had actually seen a psychologist in their past.
Right.
And that totally then took them out of the running to be vice president. Well, we can't have somebody who's seen a psychologist, running the country. We can't do that.
Right.
I mean,
heaven forbid that somebody recognize they have a problem and go get treated for it.
That they have and I've always done this. We have physical illnesses and we have mental illnesses.
Right.
If we're not going to stereotype people for a physical illness, why are we going to stereotype people with mental illness? Well, illnesses are illnesses. Doctors are doctors. Medicine's medicine. Treat the patient. And instead we stigmatize we stigmatize mental illness, but we don't physical illness.
Well, interesting though, right? It's kind of funny that you bring that up.
I shouldn't say we do. I say
I know what
my generation did. Society, however, the infamous they out there,
the people,
the
human race. But interesting that you bring up physical illness, because it makes me think about the experience that I've had encountering men in hospitals. Tends to be they're more anxious about, or at least they appear more anxious about wanting to get out of there than women do. Now the article's not referencing that. That's just a personal observation.
Right.
People in my life that I've experienced, everybody I can think of that I've seen in the hospital, that's one of those. But it goes back to, why do you feel anxious in the first place, right? Which is the lack of control, which goes back to that thing that you were bringing up, which is this notion that society has put onto men,
right,
that they should be in control of situations.
We are the problem solvers. We have to take care of people. So therefore we need to be in control because we have to be the decision makers.
And it's really bad if you're not.
Right.
Because that means that.
Well, I mean, how can you be, if you're anxious and you can't make a decision, how do you take care of those around you?
Mm-hmm.
Be it your parents or your siblings or, your significant other, your children. I mean, all of these things that we as men grow up thinking we have to, solve it. And it's with the women in my life, it's like, hey, would you just listen to me? Because they start to talk and I want to solve their problem for them. And they don't want me to solve their problem. Sometimes they want my opinion, but a lot of times they just want me to listen. And as men, our first reaction is, oh, you have a problem? Let me solve it. Let me go get my tool. Oh, you got a flat tire? Let me change the tire. We as men are programmed. I don't know. And it'd be interesting to find out. Is that just the way our chemical reactions are? Does that come down from caveman days? Everybody's hungry. Oh, I better go kill something.
Teaching people that?
Is that a learned environment thing where we tend to be problem solvers and want to solve everybody else's problems?
Well, my guess is my guess is like a lot of things, right? It's probably a combination.
Probably is.
Most men
But would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That when men hear somebody talk about, when males hear somebody talk about something, how can we solve this?
Right. And again, let's
somebody
be
may
sure
not
that people
may not even want it solved.
Right. They don't want their help.
They just want to discuss, what's going on.
But the inclination is that
for the male in the conversation to find a solution to the problem.
Right. And again, this is to say with all of this, which I'm sure, anybody who's been listening to us for a while knows this, we are obviously making big generalizations about
which we don't normally like to do.
The male sex, which is not to say that there aren't men. Obviously, there aren't men who fit this. Hopefully, a lot of you listening feel like in different areas, well, it's like, no, I'm not, maybe I have that a little bit, but no more so than any woman I've ever met or whatever, so it is to say these are obviously generalizations. But one thing the article points out, reinforcing what you said, Lance, is that men are less likely to receive treatment for mental health issues. A professor of psychology and director of men's well-being research says we've been socialized from a very young age to see emotional vulnerability in men as a weakness. Seeking help is seen as a sign of weakness as well. So it's not only that being vulnerable and admitting that I'm worried about something is a sign of weakness, but then going so far as to ask anybody else to help me with that would be
just further advances that feeling.
It builds on that feeling of anxiety. So we've got more to talk about. We've broken down the anxiety a little bit. We're going to get into balancing work and family. Now, keep in mind, in the last bit of the show, we're going to talk about what you can do in regards to these things. So you have to stick around for the last bit because it's not all hope is lost on any of this. There's actually a good bit of positive news coming out of this. So next up, what's happening at home, work and family? What are the challenges men are facing? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
With 152 million men in the United States, and according to a Wall Street Journal article, these men express anxiety differently on the whole than women do. But that's not the only place they differ. And in some areas, things are actually getting, the lines are getting blurred a little bit. And, there's a lot of those boomers, right, in the media, because that's who a lot of the media is. They're boomer age people or Gen X people that like to talk down on millennials for all the things that they're failing at and all the terrible things about their generation. But we are pleased to report, or rather the Wall Street Journal is reporting that, quote, millennial men and women are sharing housework more evenly than previous generations. Men do an equal or larger share of the dishes in nearly 44% of couples and an equal or larger share of laundry in 31% of couples. Now, that may not sound like where some people would like the stats to be, but it's important to know that that's about twice the percentage of the early 1990s, according to a 2018 study. This is easing the second shift of chores that exhausted many boomer women. Men are also picking up more childcare tasks as well.
Yep. But who set that up? Again, I will say this in defense. Who set that up for that to happen? The 15 and 20% of us boomers who were doing it for our millennial children, we set the example. And since more of us
taking credit for that,
since more of us set the example, well, why wouldn't it be? Because as more millennials saw their now boomer parents working this way, then it becomes more obvious that this is what should be and how it is expected.
Not to turn it into our boomer millennial show, but I am all for boomers taking the credit, especially where credit's due. Things like climate change too, I think, are great.
But you made it sound like, we're great. We're doing 30% of the laundry. Well, I mean, 50, but it's twice as much. So that means 15% of us we're doing half the laundry.
Or still are.
Or
you're not dead yet, right?
Or we're doing half the dishes or whatever. So we did model it because I'm sure, again, do the studies, what would happen if you went back to the next generation and saw what they were doing? Because as we were talking off air, I don't remember my father or grandfather doing a load of laundry or washing the dishes ever.
So,
I mean, I will say that, my father got sick, and when he was on disability and my mom had to work, he did start to do some household chores. But when they were both working, I didn't see that happen. So it wasn't modeled for me. Yet my millennial children, what you just read was modeled for them.
right.
Because,
In your case.
So I am. Okay, but I'm still part of the 15% that did it in previous generations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll give credit where credit's due.
And if you're so great, why is it only happening in 40% and 30%?
Well,
if you guys were getting it done,
much.
if you guys were getting the job done
Doubling.
and solving the problem, so we're just going to play with numbers, but it's still less than half of you.
Right. But it's getting better.
Okay.
And I think that's like with all things, right? We want to see the trend line. I mean, of course it would be great if,
why is it not 100%? You guys are falling short.
Okay. Let me just, on a real serious note though, let me play the other side of this real quick and just say, I'm not prepared to say that it should be 50% because I don't think, and this isn't a male thing. I think this is who am I to tell other people what the breakdown in their relationship should be?
Okay.
Because that is, we're making an assumption, right? Yep. That all women want it to be equal at home. And I don't think that's true. Right. And that's not to say that most of them don't or do or whatever, but it also makes an assumption of men that they want it to be equal. And that's not necessarily true either.
But it should have what it should be based on, in all honesty. And if we're going to use we're going to get serious card, because I was kind of serious before, but
I used to.
if you need to use each other's skill set. Mm-hmm. If somebody has a skill set, I mean, like my skill set in my relationship is logistics, but I am a horrible follow through person. So I can plan it all out and I can do the major things, but I it's not that I can't mop, I can't do these things, but I prefer not to. Where my wife gets in, boy, when she gets done, I call it putting the finishing touches on. She works just as hard as I do though, putting the finishing touches on, but that's when it looks good.
Right.
If she just does it, not as much gets done. But if I get my part of it done and she goes in and does the things that she's good at, then all of a sudden, man, everything's done and we've got more time to spend together or to spend with our children or to go places or to travel. So to your point, you have to find out if you're with someone else that you have to find out what each of your talents and skills are and learn to intertwine them so that you can get the most accomplished.
I mean, that should be the goal of a partnership, right? I mean, romantic or otherwise or whatever.
Sure.
In any household, in any business, you want to use the things that each person's good at.
Yeah, even if it's not romantic, even if it's just a roommate.
Right.
I mean, if one of you cooks really well and the other one, really, I mean, and people say, what do you mean do laundry well? What does there do laundry? Well, I've seen people who can't do laundry.
You must not do laundry well if you're asking, if you have to say
because there are some people that could really mess up laundry,
Yes, there are. We're
not going to hate on them right now. So we'll move on.
I guess that's the point that I'm bringing up though with this is that I know that the natural inclination when people hear these stats, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners who hear these stats think about, well, then maybe that's not where we want it to be. Okay, but let's also not do that thing where we've decided as society that it should be a perfectly even breakdown.
Right.
Because the bigger key, I think, is that there is an equitable exchange and that everybody's okay.
If the people in the relationship are happy with the way things are divided, then we should just all back off and say, and let them be.
Right. Just like
they've achieved happiness or normalcy for them, then that's what matters.
Leave them alone.
That's where you're going. Right.
That's my point, I guess, is because
nobody should go out there and try to meet this number because you've thrown it out there.
Right.
If you're happy with what you're doing and where you are with your roommate or your significant other or whatever, then go for it. And if you are by yourself and you got to do all of it, double thumbs up because you don't have anybody to help you.
Get a choice.
Yeah, right. You're doing it all.
You get 100% of it all.
You're becoming the expert
or 0% of it all if you just don't do it.
Yep.
So another area that I think is important to mention is the paternity leave. Okay. Because this is something, the good news is this is increasing. The bad news is that it's only available at about 16% of private sector for 16% of private sector workers.
This is what you pointed out before. it's better. But when you're starting at 0 or close to 0, it doesn't take much to be better.
Yeah.
Then being better doesn't necessarily make it good.
Exactly. And this is an area where men, and they actually bring this up in this Wall Street Journal article, some testimonials from men who had the opportunity to be there and talked about what a difference it made in their parenting skills because they got to be there. And because they were part of it, and it wasn't just, well, you deal with it all and good luck, you know, and I'll go make the money, but I don't know what's happening really other than what you tell me.
And I was lucky, and just to give a quick, synopsis, as a school teacher, one of our daughters was born in May and the other one in June. Oh, so I was home. No, I mean, you got very lucky. I had paternity leave, but I didn't have to take it and quote miss work. I didn't have to apply for it. Right. And I will swear that it makes a huge difference to be there in the first few months. And then, it just does. I mean, I think it's a huge thing, and it's a huge part that we as a society need to address and do more of. If we expect people to have good parenting skills, they need to be there from the beginning, doing all kinds of, washing the bottles, feeding. Right. It was very important for me, and very mental health and nourishing for me to be feeding a bottle. Yeah. Obviously I wasn't the mother, but to have that bottle and to be holding my young child up in my arms and close, and
making sure they survive,
and making that connection with them, and them feeling my heartbeat and those kinds of things. I think that's huge. Yeah. For them to have that from both parents.
Well, and I wonder, that's one of those areas that the stats talk about, the way that men and women responded to these statements, in the affirmative. For example, 39% of men say it makes it harder to advance in your job or career, if you're a father. Okay.
Interesting.
And 44% say that it has created a need to reduce work hours. And 100%, and then 43% have said that being a father has made you feel you couldn't give 100% at work. And 15% says that it has caused you to turn down a promotion. Now, none of these numbers, right, are 50% or more. Right. Where with women, the first three I mentioned are all at 50% or higher. Okay.
How high?
So in the makes it harder to advance in your job or career, 50%. In having created or has created a need to reduce your work hours, 54%. And has made you feel that you couldn't give 100% at work, 51%. So really,
the numbers are closer than I would have guessed them to be.
Yeah. I was surprised that they were as close as they are. But I think the story on the male side, because we're going to do the episode about women, right? So we're not counting that out. But I think the story on the male side is, I wonder, even if your company offers paternity leave, now granted, it's probably a relatively forward-thinking organization if it's offering that.
But would you take it if almost half of men are saying that it's going to stop their advancement? So, not to finish your thought, but I was right with you there.
Yeah. I mean,
would you take it if it was available? And we don't know, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know how many people turn it down.
No, we don't, because it's not offered a lot of places. And it's a relatively new thing in this country. I mean, this is another important caveat, right? Is that this has been the norm in a lot of other countries in different parts of the world for a long time, is that you have paid, parent leave. Forget paternity, maternity. You have paid leave if you have a child. That's how that works. Because it's expectation in some cultures that that's more important and you're going to be there for that. So we've got more to talk about, kind of now going into, so what do men do about some of these things? These work challenges that they face, paternity leave, the anxiety, having that family, doing those household chores. Where do we go from here? Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
With 152 million men in the United States, or thereabout at the 2010 census, there's definitely a lot of them. They make up about half of the population. So there's a good chance that if you're tuned in right now, you're a man. And if you're not a man, there's a good chance that you know a man. Almost a certainty, in fact. Lance and I, right? So there's two. There's two that you know. So we've talked so far some, Lance, right, about anxiety,
right,
and how men don't necessarily present that in the same way. It comes out more as anger or more as irritability in men than it does in women, and how that can cause problems for them, right? And the lack
and not seeking help and knowing how to deal with it.
Yes,
which can cause an even greater problem.
Yeah, that's the thing with all of this, right? Is it's not always so much about it's a problem that it's happening for you. It's a problem if you're not doing anything to address it.
Right.
And that's the story to me on that anxiety one. That's the bigger problem, is not that men have these feelings, because we established anxiety that happens, right? People have anxiety. If you're not dealing with it in a healthy way, that's the problem.
But that's why we're talking about it, because it's happening, as the article stated, it's happening more in men than we used to think it did. And so we need to talk about it so that men don't feel this unnecessary anxiety to go seek help.
Right.
That it's a much more common thing than we in the male side of things let on. So it's okay to go out and seek help so you can deal with it properly and go on with a healthy life and have healthy relationships.
I do think it's important for people to note too, that when we say help, it's not necessarily just a code word for going to get counseling. My brother, and he would tell you this because he has struggled with anger problems, for much of his life. And one of the big improvements that he's made in recent years is when he's feeling anxious or when he gets angry, he goes out and runs, and he runs until he doesn't feel that way anymore, right? That is one of those things,
right,
that you can do, because
he's using his body's own medicine,
exactly,
in a sense, to deal with it, because the adrenaline and the endorphins and all those things kick in.
Yep.
And then it overcomes the anxiety that he was feeling.
Exactly. So that is a healthy and positive way to deal with it. And Lance mentioned, part of the reason we're talking about this, right, is because it's something that isn't talked about a lot. And that's part of why it's a problem, is because there's this idea that it's not normal, or that it's, something to be ashamed of or whatever. And talking about it hopefully makes it less that
way. Which kind of fits into our mission statement, though, right?
Exactly. And that's what I was kind of leading to, is I figured this would be Lance, he cannot go through an episode without making sure that people know that the State of Us is part of a network of shows, right? And we're all working toward the same goal. And what is that goal?
Well, our goal here is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations.
And that's I think the open part today, right? I mean, we're always trying to do it all, but this is one of those.
We like to talk about a way, what is the issue, and then and how can we solve it? That's kind of the end of it, right?
I'm laughing.
We're right into that male thing.
That's right.
We fall right into the male stereotype.
Yeah.
Is that we talk about a problem, and in the third segment of our show, well, what's the solution?
Right.
We've branded ourselves as these, unknowingly, that we've fallen right into that stereotypical male thing.
That's right.
We're going to solve the problem. But if you don't talk about it,
you're not going to solve it.
You can't if people, are afraid to say anything or to speak openly about it in public for fear of retribution, you can't fix it.
Yeah.
And it needs to be, because we all want to be healthier and better in our relationships with others, be it our family or coworkers or whomever, just society.
Yeah.
When you're going shopping or whatever, you want to get along with, it would make it a whole lot better for all of us if we could learn to get along. Politics, the whole 9 yards. So
all of it.
This is a big issue.
There's not much in life that gets worse if you get along better with other people.
Exactly.
So more often than not, when in doubt.
And if anger is getting the best of you, which we have read is one of the telling signs of anxiety among men, then we need to talk about it and learn to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is too, right? The process of steps. If you've never considered, counseling or something like that, if you're willing to take the leap because you feel like you've got a problem with this, awesome. If you're not, start by telling somebody, right, that is close to you, that you trust. You don't have to. The other thing about, bringing this out more into the open also doesn't mean you have to do a Facebook post about it.
Right.
Again, if that's going to help you, great. But that's not necessarily what it means to be more open and to talk about it. You know, it also means being just comfortable talking to people you trust, even if that's just one person, you know.
Well, and if you're in a relationship and you see that you're the person that you know, be it your father or your uncle or your dad, you know, father, dad, your spouse, the article talked about ways to approach them.
Yes.
And the first thing it said, and I just rung so true to me, is don't give them an ultimatum.
Right.
Because that's one of the stereotypical things that guys will not do, you know, because you tell me I have to, then by God, I'm not going to do it no matter what.
That's right.
You know, but the different things they said there in the article, ways to approach someone who you think may be having trouble because they are irritable or they do tend to get very upset very quickly. I thought they were pretty good. So I think we all need a little bit of encouragement. So what were some of the things that the article said specifically that you could do if you know someone who you may think is having trouble with some anxiety?
Right. So it starts right out with what you said, which is one thing not to do is to deliver an ultimatum, because that can lead to a power struggle and it actually can increase someone's resistance to getting help. Instead, highlight their quality of life. It also goes on to say, tell your loved one that with effective treatment and management of what you're experiencing, you'll enjoy stuff a lot more than you do now. And we together can enjoy more things if you learn how to manage this. I started out college as a psychology major. And one of the things that frustrated me in the small time I spent learning about the field is oftentimes the terminology that doesn't get explained that gets used. But the idea that you can get rid of anxiety, right? You shouldn't go into it with that mindset.
Right.
It has to do with, again, understanding how to handle it in a healthy way.
There you go. I like that phraseology.
Yeah, that's how you solve it. I mean, that's
right.
A solution doesn't always mean that you get rid of the thing, right?
But how can I handle it in a healthy manner?
So let's talk a little bit more about, before we wrap up here, Lance, because we've only got a few minutes. We talked about the anxiety thing, and I know we spent a lot of time on that, but I think that, and you mentioned this before the show, right? It leads into so many other things. A lot of these other issues that people face, it doesn't mean that it's going to fix them, but it means it will be easier to solve them.
And many times it starts out as anxiety and blossoms into other things.
Right.
So if
creates other problems.
You can, as you said, deal with your anxiety in a healthy manner, it might take care of a lot of other issues that you're having in your life.
So the last thing I want to mention is I think that Lance and I are both on the same page about increasing access to paternity leave, right? For men.
We talked about that. Sure.
Because
I think it's huge. I mean, as I said before, I wouldn't trade those early months, weeks anyway, of spending with my daughters, you know, providing their care. I mean, you know, all kinds of the intimate care that it takes for a newborn. And I know it made it easier for my wife too, because she's talked about it because she could rest. Yeah. And then her time with them was much better because she was rested. She wasn't overworked, you know, trying to take care of them to where she couldn't even enjoy being with them. She could take her nap or do whatever she needed, and she could rest comfortably knowing that I was getting to take care of them. But at the same time, it allowed me to create that bond with them that I think is necessary for children to have to feel comfortable in their environment.
Yeah. So we definitely want to increase access to that. I think that's important because part of increasing access also means it normalizes it. And if you know that my buddy has access to that at work, then I don't feel like.
Well, then you don't feel like 45 to 50% of men wouldn't feel like it's going to stop a promotion.
Right.
Because everybody who's having a family is going to do it. And not everybody has a family, but the majority of people do.
Right. And then for the ones that do, it becomes more normal. And that's the part of or it becomes less unusual. Right. Let's put it that way. Because normal, is
people won't be talking about you at work.
Yeah.
Hey, Stan just missed 6 weeks and he wasn't here. And
right.
We worked on this big project and now Stan's going to come back and you didn't know what's going on. It'll just be, oh, this is the way it goes. And we'll catch Stan up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I will, you've shared a lot, Lance, kind of interspersed through the show about personal
stuff as we've gone.
On the anxiety front, because I can't speak as much to the
parental. Well, I was
right.
kind of speaking to the parental
to
stuff.
the parental stuff.
Yeah.
Because
you have not had that option
right,
yet.
I do not have children. So.
And I said yet.
Right. That's right. Yeah, well, we'll see. I don't know. There's, it's the back and forth, the waffling, right? The crippled by indecision, the anxiety.
There's your anxiety
I'm trying
of whether or not we want to take care of another human being.
Yes. So, but on the anxiety front, I mentioned it before, and I think it's important that people get it, that one of the solving things, okay, if you feel like it's important, and I do, I mean, that's why Lance and I have this segment of the show, right? I don't think that's inherently a bad thing that men on average feel more inclined to try to solve problems. I mean, that's a good thing. Now, how you use it's a different thing. But on that note, I think solving more than that, it's overcoming challenges that you're faced with, right? And for me, I grew up and I never really thought about anxiety, and I was finally faced with it at a point where I decided to get help for it. And it was short. I mean, it was like a 6-month thing. I went and saw a professional, and for me that worked. And for me, it also became something that I was then comfortable telling other people about, because for me, it was framed in a way of, I was faced with something that I never expected I'd be faced with in my life. It was a terrible time that brought me to where I was facing anxiety, and I overcame it, and I'm still here, and I'm okay, and by most standards, I think better than okay.
I came out the other side,
right?
And I've learned how to deal with it, and now
I feel
on.
stronger because of the experience. And I think that has to be, that part of the story doesn't get told enough. It's
agree. I
went and I sought treatment, and that was the end of it. And no, it's almost never the end of it, right? There's
life continues
thing beyond that.
Right.
And so that's why I think I just wanted to mention that before we closed out, because I think it's important, that people understand, especially men, that it doesn't have to end with, I'm getting help for this thing, and it shouldn't be that way, but you don't have to feel that way, because it should be about, you're getting help to get better, to move on with life. That's, I think, the message.
Very important message. I'm glad you said that.
So, Lance, we want people to tune in, right? Because part of, especially with episodes like this, we're having these open conversations, trying to bring and shed light on things that people don't talk about as much. It only works if more people are part of the conversation, right? So if somebody wants to go, because this is a syndicated radio program, right? And it's a podcast.
Both.
So whichever way you're listening, if you're going to invite somebody else to tune in, they may not be near you. So the easiest thing to do is have them tune into the podcast version, right?
Correct.
And what are some of the ways that our listeners could invite others to tune in there?
Well, there's Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and anywhere else that fine podcasts are found.
And they can just, for all the ways, they can go to the website, right?
Yes. They're all right there, and you can go to the website and click on where.
And what is the website?
The website?
Come on,
for
Boomer.
us?
You got it.
For us?
Yes, for us.
It's thestateofus.org.
Yes. He got it.
I've known it all along.
Yeah.
I just play with you.
He just likes to be a pain.
I just toy around.
For The State of Us on TrueChat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, as always, for doing a good job on today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.